When the new chauffeur arrived at Briarwood Hall, the rain had already been falling for 3 days. The moors were drowning in mist, and the great house looked less like a home than a mausoleum, grand, cold, and waiting to be claimed. From the high window of the West Gallery, Evelyn Whitmore watched the motor car roll through the gates. It was a modest machine, not one of the fashionable touring cars her mother admired. But the man stepping out of it moved as though he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the sort of man who carried his own weather. His cap was soaked through, his coat dark with rain, yet he didn't flinch as thunder cracked above the oaks. He simply looked up at the house, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "That'll be the new driver," said Mrs. Grange, the housekeeper, appearing behind Evelyn with her usual stealth. "Reed, they call him. War man, so they say. Drove for generals, not ladies." Evelyn turned from the window. "War man or not, Mother will have him polishing silver if he so much as breathes too loudly in the garage." Mrs. Grange smiled grimly. "Your mother won't notice him, Miss Evelyn." "But you might." That evening, the new chauffeur was summoned to the drawing room to meet Lady Whitmore, a woman whose pearls could outshine her pity. Evelyn sat beside her, pretending to read. "Mr. Reed," Lady Whitmore said, without looking up from her teacup, "you'll find the Whitmore automobiles are temperamental. The Daimler, in particular, refuses to start since my husband's accident." Reed bowed slightly. His voice was low, roughened by years of shouting over engines and gunfire. "Machines remember the hands that built them, my lady. They don't like strangers." Her mother sniffed. "Then perhaps you'll persuade it to forget." Evelyn dared a glance. He met her eyes briefly, only a moment. But something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or defiance. It felt like the first spark in a long-dead engine. Later, unable to sleep, Evelyn wandered to the garage. The air was heavy with oil and damp straw. The Daimler stood in the center like a creature half asleep, its brass fittings dulled by neglect. Thomas Reed, for that was his name, she had learned, was there, sleeves rolled, hands black with grease. A lantern swung beside him. He didn't notice her at first. He turned the crank. The motor coughed once, then died. Again. Silence. "It doesn't like the rain," she said quietly. He straightened, startled, but not embarrassed. "No, my lady." "But then, neither do I." She stepped closer. "You fought in France, didn't you?" He nodded. "Drove ambulances. When the engines stopped, people died." Her voice softened. "Then perhaps that's why you're here. To bring the dead back to life." He looked at her. Really looked. "Engines, maybe." Not people. She touched the cold brass of the radiator. "Then start with this one." The Daimler shuddered awake, coughing and roaring like something reborn. Reed laughed under his breath. "There." She only needed a reason. Evelyn smiled. "Don't we all?" The next morning, Lady Whitmore found her daughter in the stables, her hands still streaked with soot. "Good heavens, Evelyn! You smell like a factory." "I was merely observing," Evelyn said. "The chauffeur's quite skilled." "He's a servant," her mother snapped. "Observe from a distance." Evelyn curtsied with feigned sweetness. "Of course, mother." From a very respectful distance, but distance, once bridged, rarely widens again. That night, as the house slept, Evelyn heard the faint hum of an engine outside. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and crept to the drive. The Daimler stood idling in the dark, its lamps throwing pale circles onto the rain. Reed was in the driver's seat. "Couldn't sleep," he said when he saw her. "Machines like to be run now and then." She hesitated. "Could you teach me?" He studied her, the silk nightrobe, the bare feet on wet stone, and finally opened the door. "If you promise not to tell your mother?" She slid in beside him. The seat smelled of leather and smoke. Her heartbeat matched the trembling of the engine. "Clutch, brake, throttle," he murmured, guiding her hands. "Everything in balance, like truth and lies." "And if I lose balance?" "Then you learn the hard way." "Same as everyone else." The car lurched forward, slow, awkward, alive. Rain lashed against the windscreen, and she laughed, truly laughed, for the first time since her father's death. When they stopped, the manor was a shadow behind them, distant and unreal. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. "I am," she replied. "But it feels like freedom." Over the following weeks, their lessons continued in secret. At dawn, when the maids were still lighting fires, she would sneak down to the garage. He showed her how to adjust the choke, how to listen for the heartbeat of the pistons, how to feel when something was wrong. "Engines lie, but they can't pretend," he told her. "People can." Sometimes he spoke of the war, not the glory, but the mud, the smell, the endless noise. She listened in silence, knowing he needed the telling as much as she needed the sound of it. She brought him tea once. He refused politely. "Servants don't drink with ladies." She handed him the cup anyway. "Then pretend I'm not one." He didn't answer, but he drank. The gossip began like smoke. The gardener saw her walking near the garage. A maid claimed to have found tire tracks leading from the estate road at dawn. Her mother called her into the morning room. "Evelyn, I hear you've taken an interest in machinery." "It's harmless, mother." "Harmless?" Lady Whitmore's tone turned sharp. "A Whitmore woman does not smell of petrol. You will end these excursions immediately, and if I don't, then I shall see to it that Mr. Reed finds other employment." Silence. Evelyn bowed her head, but her eyes were burning. That night, she found Reed packing a satchel. "You're leaving," she said. "Your mother was persuasive." "Then let me persuade you otherwise." He shook his head. "You don't belong in the dust, Miss Evelyn." "And I don't belong in the light." She stepped closer. "Then perhaps we belong somewhere between." He froze, her hand brushing his sleeve, the nearness electric and dangerous. But before either could speak, thunder cracked overhead, and the lantern went out. When light returned, he was gone. She stood alone beside the sleeping Daimler, the engine cold, her heart colder still. Morning came with the kind of polished quiet that meant a decision had been made without her. The tray at Evelyn's door held grapefruit, dry toast, and a note in her mother's precise hand. Luncheon at one with Lord Pembroke and his aunt. Wear the grey silk. Grey suited the day. It suited resignation. Evelyn dressed as instructed and went down to the morning room, where everything smelled of lavender and old opinions. Lord Pembroke rose when she entered. He was handsome in the way a mantel clock is handsome, expensive, motionless, telling time only for himself. "Miss Whitmore," he said, bowing. "Your absence from town has been lamented." "My father is buried here," she replied. "I found London too alive for grief." "Grief is best endured with routine," Lady Whitmore observed. "Which is why we will set a date." Pembroke smiled with thin politeness. "I am, as ever, at your disposal." Evelyn folded her hands so they would not shake. "I had not realized I was disposed of." Her mother's eyes flashed a warning. "Evelyn," Pembroke cleared his throat, "I hope you do not think me unfeeling. I admire constancy. I admire order. Briarwood requires both, and I am prepared to offer them." And what do you require in return? Evelyn asked. He considered. Conformity. It is not a vulgar word, whatever radicals say. A house is not kept with romance. No one looked at her then, which was a mercy. If they had, they might have seen the image that rose in her mind unbidden. A night road, wet and glistening. A hand over hers on the throttle. The mutinous joy of movement. Romance had kept her from fainting after the funeral. Romance had been a lesson in breathing. We will announce the engagement at the harvest ball, Lady Whitmore said, and that was that. After luncheon, Mrs. Grange found Evelyn in the corridor, her voice a hush of linen. He's gone toward the station, the housekeeper murmured. No one saw me see him, if you take my meaning. If a letter were to catch him, it would have to be quick. Evelyn's pulse climbed the stairs before she did. In her room, she sat at the desk and stared at a blank sheet of paper until it blurred. What could she write that would not ruin him or herself? Come back, and I will throw my life away. Do not come back, and I will die of staying. She wrote instead, I hope you find fair weather. Thank you for teaching me to drive. Then, before she could betray her heart with a postscript, she folded it and sealed it. By the time the groom reached the lane, the afternoon train had already taken Thomas Reed somewhere she could not follow. The house settled into rehearsal. Invitations breathed out of the writing room like doves. Florists came and measured window ledges with lengths of ribbon. Lady Whitmore supervised as though the empire itself might sway if a bouquet were placed at the wrong angle. Evelyn moved among it all, a ghost rehearsing a life she had once declared she would never live. On the third night, unable to bear the scent of roses, she fled to the garage. The Daimler sat in its bay, sheeted like a body. She pulled the cover aside. Her palm fit the polished curve of the radiator. The metal held the day's warmth like a memory. A small brass key lay on the driver's seat, looped in a frayed ribbon. Her father's key. It had hung on a nail for months after his death, until her mother ordered it put away. Who had put it here? The lantern on the wall guttered, and a draught moved through the rafters. She thought of Thomas's hands on the crank, the way he listened rather than forced. She climbed in, set the throttle, placed the key, and turned it. The engine coughed once, like a prideful old man clearing his throat, then died. She tried again. Nothing. Machines remember the hands that built them, he had said. She pressed her forehead to the wheel. Then remember my father, she whispered. Just long enough to let me breathe? Something clinked beneath the dash. She reached down and felt along the leather panel. A small packet, flat and stiff, had been wedged in the seam where no one would think to look. She drew it out. Brown paper, wax seal, her father's initials impressed in the red. On the back, in his angular hand. To be opened by my daughter should I fail to keep a promise. She broke the seal before fear could speak. Inside was a single page, torn from a larger document at a neat angle. The heading was unmistakable. Last Will and Testament of Sir Arthur Whitmore. The date was the evening before his accident. Clause 7 read, In the matter of my daughter's inheritance, I name Mr. Thomas Reed, lately of the Ambulance Corps, as guardian of the estate's income until such time as my daughter enters into a marriage of her choosing and not of my arrangement. Should she be coerced, the guardianship remains. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time, tracing each letter as though the ink might lift and speak. Guardian. Not heir. Not rival. A shield she had failed to see. A floorboard creaked. She turned. Lord Pembroke stood in the doorway, his gloved hand resting on the frame as if posing for a portrait. The groom must have told him where she went when she was unwell. People like him always learned the habits of others and mistook it for love. "What have you found?" he asked lightly. "A proof that the house is not yours to manage," she said, voice steadying. "Nor my life." He stepped into the lantern light. His smile was mild, but his eyes were the colour of rain when it means to stay. "Your father was a sentimentalist. Guardianships are for infants, or for the protected," she said. "There is a difference." "May I see?" he asked. She folded the page and placed it behind her back. "No." "Then I will simply rely on our understanding," he said. "We are to be married, Evelyn. Everything else is noise." He turned to go, then paused, as if struck by a thought so trivial he had almost forgotten it. "Ah, the driver. I do hope you didn't write anything compromising. Men like that collect scraps of a lady's kindness and trade them as currency." The lantern hissed. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the paper until it crackled. "He is not a man like that." "Every man is a man like that when hungry," Pembroke said gently, "and servants are always hungry." When he had gone, she leaned against the Daimler and let the quiet close around her. Clause 7 burned through her mind like a line of rope on a pulley. Guardian until she chose. Chose what? Chose love. Chose herself. In the days that followed, she tested the house the way one tests a fence for weakness. Where did it sag when pressure was applied? Who flinched when asked the wrong question? She discovered, to no one's surprise, that the weakest point was always pride. She visited the steward and asked to see the ledgers. "I am to be lady of the house," she said. "I should learn its bones." He flushed and stammered and fetched them. Expenditures lined up like soldiers, income slouched like debtors. Twice the figures did not add. Twice she circled them in pencil. The steward perspired. "Lord Pembroke advised." "Lord Pembroke does not live here," she said, and turned the page. She met with the tenants. Old Larkin spoke of a broken drainage tunnel never repaired after the spring floods. Evelyn wrote it down and earmarked funds from a Christmas charity her mother favoured. When Lady Whitmore protested, Evelyn said, "A Christmas without sewage will do your pearls no harm." The argument was brief and furious, and ended with a door closing on the word ungrateful. It didn't matter. Something inside her had already stepped through a different door. At night, she read the torn clause until she could recite it with her eyes shut. Sometimes she saw his face as he wrote it, her father at the desk, the shape of his hand, the set of his jaw when he did something he knew would be called foolish. She remembered his laugh the first time he let her hold the reins of a pony. "You are not fragile, Evelyn. You are fine." 1 week before the harvest ball, the florist arrived to measure the staircases for garlands. The head gardener trailed after, muttering, and Mrs. Grange dispatched footmen like chess pieces. Amid the bustle, Evelyn slipped into the library for air. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon glare, and the room felt like a chapel preoccupied with its own holiness. She crossed to her father's desk. The blotter was clean, the pens arranged to please a ghost. She lifted the blotter absently. Beneath, a pale scar in the leather marked where a page had once been sliced away. The rest of the will, she thought. The missing page. Someone had taken it after the accident or before. She replaced the blotter and turned toward the shelves. The top row held travel narratives her father pretended to read and never did. The second held histories of men who mistook wars for biographies. The third held a small tin soldier, missing an arm. She remembered it. He had set it between books to remind himself of something. She could not recall what. Her mother's voice floated down the hall, bright with performance. "Only cream roses, Mrs. Grange. Nothing gaudy. The county will be watching." The county always watched. The county kept score. The county forgave nothing until it forgot everything. Evelyn took the small soldier down and closed her hand around it. Its head was loose. It turned in her palm to face a different direction. She smiled despite herself. A soldier who refused to look where he was placed. When she came out onto the terrace, a scatter of petals lay on the flagstones, cast off from the florist's practice bouquet. She nudged them with her toe. They clung to the stone as if undecided about whether to be beautiful or waste. She thought again of Thomas standing in the rain, his cap streaming, the lantern making a halo of smoke. Machines remember the hands that built them. Perhaps hearts did as well. A boy from the village came up the drive with telegrams. He handed one to Lady Whitmore, one to the steward, and hesitated over the third. "For Miss Whitmore," he mumbled, ears pink. Evelyn took it. The envelope was thin, the paper brittle with hurry. She tore it open. "Train to Briarwood halted by flood. Mechanic needed at garage. Send instructions." Ah. Her breath caught. Not read, surely. He would not sign so. The steward glanced at her telegram with polite curiosity. "Good news, miss?" "A nuisance," she said evenly, and folded it away. Could be Roberts, the blacksmith. It could be Riley, the miller. It could be anything but hope. She told herself this until the lie went quiet. That night, when the house slept and the florist's string still ghosted the banister, she went to the garage with a lantern. The Daimler waited. The key was where she had left it. She turned it once, lightly, as if to wake a child. The engine refused. She laughed under her breath, the sound closer to a sob. Then she tucked the lantern into a crook of beam so the light fell where Thomas would have crouched, and she sat on the running board with her father's claws folded in her pocket, and she listened to the rain. She did not hear the door at the back open. She did not see the figure until his shadow crossed her knees. When she looked up, the lantern lit the edge of a jaw she knew too well. "Forgive the hour," Thomas said, water dripping from the brim of his cap. "I would have written, but the engine wouldn't start." For a moment, Evelyn thought he was an apparition conjured by exhaustion, some ghost of longing come to rest on the scent of oil and rain. But Thomas stood there, real and dripping, eyes fixed on her, as if to confirm she existed too. "You came back," she whispered. "I never left," he said quietly. "I just took the long way around." She rose from the running board. "My mother dismissed you." "She did," he admitted, "but your father didn't." "I found this waiting at the depot." From his coat pocket, he drew a folded letter, the paper warped by damp. The handwriting was unmistakable, bold, precise, her father's. "I was meant to give it to you when you turned 21, Thomas said. "But then he died, and I wasn't sure if the promise still held." Evelyn reached for the letter with trembling hands. Her father's voice seemed to rise from the page as she read aloud. "To my daughter Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I have failed to keep a promise, to live long enough to see you free. I chose your husband poorly once before. I will not do so again. Mr. Thomas Reed has agreed to watch over Briarwood until you are strong enough to claim it. Trust him, even when the world forbids you to. You will know your heart's truth when the engine starts again. Your father." She pressed the page to her chest. "He knew," she murmured. "He knew you'd be the one to help me." Thomas smiled faintly. "He believed in you, not in me." "You underestimate yourself." "I have good reason to." He leaned against the Daimler, the tired lines of his face deepening in the lamplight. "I thought leaving would keep you safe. But I heard about the engagement. I couldn't." He stopped. "Couldn't let it happen." She finished for him. He nodded once. That man is after the estate, not you. And what if I told you the estate isn't his to take? She reached into her coat and handed him the torn page from the will. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening. So that's why your mother wanted me gone, he said. I was written into your father's trust. You were meant to protect me. I failed at that too. No, she said softly. You obeyed. He shook his head. Obedience is just another name for cowardice when it costs someone else their freedom. They stood in silence, the storm tapping against the tin roof. Evelyn could feel the ache between what was said and what wasn't. You'll be ruined if you stay, she warned. My mother will see to it. Thomas looked up at her, rainwater tracing the edge of his cheek. Then let her. Some things are worth ruin. The words landed between them like an oath. She took a step closer. If you mean that, then help me end this farce before it begins. He frowned. How? By showing them I can drive my own life. Quite literally, her plan was absurd, reckless, entirely hers. At dawn, she said, the engagement procession would parade through the village in the family motorcar. If the Daimler rolled through those gates carrying her alone, no driver, no groom, no chaperone, every whisper in the county would ignite. Her mother would faint. Pembroke would retreat to preserve his dignity, and Evelyn Whitmore would never again be anyone's ornament. Thomas stared at her, half in admiration, half in horror. That's madness. Freedom usually is. He exhaled. The car's not ready. Then fix it. He rubbed a hand through his hair, leaving streaks of grease. The fuel line's clogged, the ignition's rusted, and half the world wants us both unemployed. Then start with the rusted part. The challenge made him smile, the rare, real kind that reached his eyes. He rolled up his sleeves. Yes, Miss Whitmore. Evelyn? She corrected. If we're to destroy my reputation together, you might as well use my name. She lit another lantern while he worked. Sparks hissed from the spanner. The smell of oil and smoke filled the air. Every so often their hands brushed, an accident neither corrected. By the time the sky lightened from black to grey, the Daimler gave a low, uncertain growl. Thomas stepped back. She'll run, for a while. Evelyn stood beside him, hair damp with mist, cheeks flushed. That's all I need. Evelyn, he said, voice low, almost pleading. If you do this, you can't undo it. You'll be cast out. You'll lose everything I never wanted? She smiled sadly. Let it go. He swallowed. And what if I can't? Then stay. Drive with me. He met her gaze, long enough for hope to take shape, dangerous and alive. Then he shook his head. I've lived behind someone else's wheel my whole life. You should know how it feels to hold it alone. She nodded. Then wait for me at the crossroads. She climbed into the driver's seat, skirts gathered, fingers steady on the key. The engine coughed once, then roared awake. He stepped back as she drove out into the silver dawn, tires hissing on the wet gravel. She didn't look back. Not yet. Inside the manor, bells began to ring, servants shouting, voices rising. The bride was gone, the car stolen. Evelyn smiled through her tears. For the first time, the road ahead belonged to her. The village was just waking when she passed through. Farmers stopped mid-step, hens scattered, dogs barked. The Whitmore crest flashed on the hood, a symbol of obedience, now flying under rebellion. At the far end of the lane, the car jolted, sputtered. Steam hissed from the bonnet. She slowed, heart pounding. No, she whispered. Not now. The engine stuttered once more, then died completely. She climbed out into the rain, boots sinking into the mud. The world was silent, except for the faint ticking of metal cooling. Evelyn lifted the bonnet, mimicking Thomas's gestures, searching for the clog he had mentioned. Her gloves were soon black with grease. She laughed bitterly. "A Whitmore woman does not smell of petrol, mother. But a Whitmore woman can save herself." The sound of hoofbeats echoed behind her. She turned, expecting her mother's carriage or Pembroke's wrath. Instead, Thomas rode toward her, coat flapping, eyes dark with worry. "I told you to wait," she said, half laughing, half sobbing. "I did," he answered, dismounting, at the crossroads. "And then I realized I'm not much good at waiting." Together they bent over the engine. He worked fast, murmuring instructions. She followed every word. The motor sputtered, hesitated, then caught. She looked up at him. "You saved me again." He shook his head. "You saved yourself." "I just kept the engine warm." They stood in the rain, the car humming softly beside them, steam rising like breath. Behind them, Briarwood Hall loomed through the fog, its towers pale, its windows watching. Thomas brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Where will you go?" "Wherever this takes me," she said. "There's a world beyond the hedges, isn't there?" He smiled. "There is. And it doesn't care who your father was." "Good," she whispered. "Then perhaps it's time I learned who I am without him." She opened the driver's door, but before stepping in, she turned to him. "You're coming with me?" He hesitated only a second, then nodded. "I thought you'd never ask." When the car pulled away, the gates of Briarwood groaned open, and the road stretched out before them, narrow, uncertain, free. Behind them, the house grew smaller until it was nothing but shadow. Ahead, the sky broke open, pale light spilling across the hills. Evelyn pressed her foot to the pedal. The engine answered, and for the first time, she didn't need permission to move. They reached the ridge by noon, the road a rib of mud and flint. Below, the valley opened like a book, fields stitched with hedgerows, a thin river threading silver through reeds. Evelyn drove until her shoulders ached, until the house behind them blurred into weather and rumour. When the car finally wheezed and begged for mercy, Thomas guided her off the road toward a stand of beeches. "Here," he said. "Let the engine cool. Let us remember to breathe." They sat on the running board and ate what she had stolen from the breakfast tray, 3 sugared biscuits and a wedge of cheese. It tasted like daring. For a little while, they spoke of nothing heavier than the names of clouds. But the world is not kind to happiness that forgets to look over its shoulder. A cart rattled past on the lane. The driver slowed when he recognized the Whitmore crest, then clicked his tongue and moved on with a look that could not decide whether to be scandal or pity. By mid-afternoon, 2 boys from the village appeared with more nerve than trousers, circling the car at a respectful distance, eyes bright with a story they would sell for half a penny. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag. "By evening, your mother will know where we've gone." "She always knows," Evelyn said, surprised by the absence of bitterness. "She has a map of me I've never seen." "We can vanish farther," he said, "north to Leeds. Even farther if we must. And what then?" She watched a kestrel hang in the sky, wings like a question. "We live above a workshop. I smell of petrol with your blessing instead of her disapproval. We marry ourselves over tea and call it freedom." His smile thinned. "It would be honest. It would also be cowardice if I flee because I am afraid to face what binds me." She turned the small tin soldier over in her pocket. Its loose head clicked against her palm. "I want our life. I also want my name back. Both, if I can manage it. 1. If I must choose. He studied her a long moment, seeing not a girl without a chaperone, but a woman deciding the terms of her existence. Then we go back, he said, on your terms. They returned at dusk by the long road to avoid the village. Jasmine and smoke drifted from cottage windows. Somewhere a dog barked itself brave. As they crested the last hill, Briarwood rose from the dim like a reprimand carved in stone. Lamps blazed along the front, too many for evening. Company, audience. The harvest ball would be tonight, not next week. Lady Whitmore had moved the feast to catch her daughter in the act of absence. Evelyn steadied the wheel. She means to make a lesson of me. Then let her, Thomas said, but make it yours. They left the car hidden among laurels behind the west wing. Inside, the house thrummed with violin and gossip. Pearls bobbed, laughter shone. The county had come to measure roses and disgrace. Mrs. Grange ghosted up beside them near the cloakroom, her voice thin with duty and treason. Through the service corridor, she whispered, to the library. He's there, the lord that would be. Your mother wants you on the stairs in 10 minutes. If you have thunder to bring it now. Evelyn gripped the housekeeper's hand. If I fail you, forgive me. You don't fail by speaking true, Mrs. Grange said. You only fail by being quiet when quiet is a lie. The library door stood ajar. Inside, Lord Pembroke poured brandy as if it belonged to his blood. The steward hovered, eager for instruction. Lady Whitmore faced the fireplace with a poise that could cut glass. Ah, Pembroke said, turning. The prodigal bride. Evelyn stepped in and shut the door. Thomas stayed in the shadow near the shelves. She took the folded clause from her dress and laid it on the desk, beside the blotter scar where the page had been cut free. My father named a guardian, she said, until I marry where I choose. Lady Whitmore's flinch was almost invisible. That clause is sentimental nonsense. It has no force. It has the force of his will, Evelyn said. Pembroke lifted the paper, scanning it with careful eyes, his mouth sharpened. Neatly torn. Conveniently discovered. And where is the remainder? You bring us a scrap, as if it were law. The steward cleared his throat. If I may. No, Lady Whitmore snapped. But the man could not help himself. He had the look of one who has carried a secret too long and longs to share the weight. I locked the will in the safe, he said, sweating. After the accident. But when his lordship, he nodded at Pembroke, asked to review it for the settlement, the last page was missing. Pembroke's voice became silk. You imply theft? I imply nothing, the steward said, implying everything. Evelyn held her mother's gaze. Did you cut it, mother? To spare me, you told yourself, or to spare the house. Either way, you made me property. Lady Whitmore's pearls shone like frost. I did what women do. I preserved what can be preserved. You preserved control, Evelyn said, gentler than she felt. I don't need a keeper. I need a choice. Pembroke set down the paper with theatrical care. Forgive me for returning us to practicalities. The honour of both our houses requires an announcement tonight. Afterward, you may squabble over clauses and scraps to your heart's content. But the county will see constancy. It will see order. And if the county sees a woman refuse? Evelyn asked. He laughed softly. It will see a tantrum. Thomas stepped from the shadow. It will see courage. Pembroke's expression chilled. Ah, the mechanic. How instructive that you return now, when a scene might elevate your price. I return because I was asked, Thomas said, by the man whose name still pays for your gloves. Enough. Lady Whitmore said. The word, a whip. She turned to her daughter. You will not ruin me. Evelyn felt a strange and tender sorrow. I never meant to ruin you, Mother. I only meant to stop letting you ruin me. She reached into her bodice and drew out her father's letter, the one Thomas had brought in the night. She handed it to Lady Whitmore. Read it. Hear him. If you ever loved him, hear him. Lady Whitmore did not take the page. She stared at it as if it were fire disguised as paper. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than Evelyn had ever heard it. He wrote to a man of engines instead of to me. He wrote to the only person who would not be tempted to spend me, Evelyn said. He wrote to a servant, because servants keep promises longer than gentlemen keep patience. The door opened. Music swelled, dulled again as the door closed. Mrs. Grange slipped in, breathless. They are ready for you on the stairs, my lady, she said to Lady Whitmore. They expect the announcement. Lady Whitmore lifted her chin. They shall have one. They mounted the main staircase together, mother and daughter, the banister laced with cream roses, the chandelier prickling with light. Faces tilted upward like flowers to the sun. Pembroke took his place halfway down, where the acoustics favoured pronouncements. Friends, he began smoothly, we gather not only to celebrate harvest, but to honour a union. Stop, Evelyn said. A hush fell with the clean finality of a blade. She stepped forward. Her voice did not tremble. I will not marry to collect a county's approval. I will not wed a man who measures love in acreage and obedience. My father's will named a guardian to ensure that my fortune would never outweigh my freedom. I choose to honour that gasps rippled. A woman near the harp clutched her pearls as if they might implode. Pembroke's smile frayed. You disgrace yourself. No, Evelyn said. I reclaim myself. A murmur, uncertain, like wind considering a door. Lady Whitmore stood motionless, all the battles of a life fighting behind her eyes. Then, slowly, she stepped aside. It was the smallest motion Evelyn had ever seen, and it split history in two. What will you do? Lady Whitmore whispered. Without this house to hold you in place? Live, Evelyn said, and ask it to be a home, not a verdict. From the back of the hall, someone laughed, short, mean, relieved. The steward flinched. Pembroke recovered his poise with a showman's bow. Then I congratulate you, he said, on your poverty. Thomas's voice came low and steady across the marble. On her courage. Evelyn descended the last steps. The room parted as if it understood something beyond good manners. She reached Thomas and took his hand. For a heartbeat, all she could hear was the old engine of her own blood. Come with me, she said. He squeezed once. Always. They turned toward the door. In the instant before it closed behind them, Evelyn looked back. Lady Whitmore met her gaze. The pearls were still bright, but the face above them had softened, not in approval, not yet, but in release. She lifted a hand, almost imperceptible, as if to bless what she could not bear to name. Outside, night had thickened to rain. They ran for the laurels, laughing because they were colder than fear. The Daimler waited, patient as a good horse. Evelyn slid behind the wheel. The key turned. Nothing. She tried again. Silence. Thomas leaned in, listening not with his ears, but with something older. He nodded toward the dash. Once more, and mean it. She did. The engine shivered, gathered itself, and came to life. Where? He asked. Not away, she said. Not yet. To the chapel, they drove across the gravel and around to the small stone building where every Whitmore had bartered with God since the first one learned to spell. Inside, Candles waited like old friends. On the altar, a Bible and a pen. On the wall, plaques with names carved in obedience. Evelyn set her hands on the rail. The air smelled of beeswax and cedar, the perfume of promises. Thomas stood beside her without touching. "My father thought a clause could save me," she said. "It helped. But he also raised me to think myself porcelain. He forgot I could be steel." "You are both," Thomas said. "That is why they fear you." She turned to him. "Will you marry me here someday, when we can afford nothing but yes?" "When you choose," he said. "Not a day earlier." She laughed, the sound catching on relief. "Then let this be the day I choose my life. Tomorrow, we face solicitors. Tomorrow, we face the county. Tonight, we remember that engines answer when called by their right names. They left the chapel and crossed the wet grass to the car. Behind them, Briarwood glittered like a city at sea. Ahead, the drive curved toward a future with teeth. She took the wheel. "Home?" Thomas asked. "Yes," she said, "but on our terms." They rolled forward, and the house did not stop them. Morning came pale and unfamiliar. The first light over Briarwood Hall looked softer, as if even the sky hesitated to judge what had happened in the night. Evelyn and Thomas returned to the stables just before dawn. The horses stirred in their stalls, uneasy with the smell of oil and rain. Mrs. Grange was waiting, apron on, face stern, eyes red from something that wasn't sleep. "I suppose you'll both be packing then?" she said. Evelyn nodded. "If we're allowed." The old housekeeper's mouth twitched. "You were never allowed, Miss Evelyn." "That's the point. Now go before the cook wakes and the staff start asking whether courage is contagious." Thomas pressed her hand briefly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Mrs. Grange said. "Just make sure the girl who used to polish silver never has to curtsy again." They crossed the courtyard to the Daimler. The gravel gleamed like pearls, spilled by the dark. Evelyn paused to look back at the manor, the only home she had ever known, and the one that had never really belonged to her. "Do you regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Not yet," she said. "Ask me again when the world stops spinning." They drove east. By the time the sun cleared the trees, Briarwood was a smudge in the mirror. Fields replaced hedges, cottages gave way to open road. They stopped at a coaching inn for tea and news. The innkeeper, too polite to gossip outright, couldn't hide the thrill in her voice when she said, "The Whitmore girl?" Gone off with her driver. Some say he stole her fortune. Others say he saved her from it. Evelyn smiled into her cup. "Maybe both." Thomas looked at her over the steam. "If they've already decided the story, we might as well earn the ending." "And what ending do you want?" "The kind where you don't look over your shoulder," he said. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Then we'll build it ourselves." They found rooms above a mechanic's shop in a town that smelled of coal dust and possibility. Evelyn traded silks for a linen dress and began to write letters, not apologies, but instructions, to the steward, to the tenants, to the solicitor who had once treated her like fine furniture. Each began the same way. "From this day forward, Briarwood is to be managed in trust by those who live from its soil." When Thomas brought her supper, he found her surrounded by papers. "You mean to give it away?" he asked. "Not give," she said. "Return. It was never meant to be one family's cage." He laughed softly. "You sound like your father." "I hope so." He believed an engine should serve, not be worshipped. "And what of you?" "I'll learn to fix them," she said. "If I can keep a house alive, I can keep a machine breathing." So he taught her. The first time she stripped a carburetor and reassembled it, She looked up with grease on her cheek and victory in her eyes. "See," she said, "freedom makes fine mechanics." Days lengthened into weeks. The headlines faded. Lord Pembroke returned to London society. Lady Whitmore retreated to Bath for her nerves. Yet sometimes, when the evening post arrived, a letter came from Mrs. Grange. Gossip, folded in affection. "Your mother has taken to the gardens," one note said. "She walks without a maid and speaks kindly to the tenants. It seems scandal is a better tutor than breeding." Evelyn read the line twice and whispered, "Then perhaps she'll forgive me after all." Thomas, tightening a bolt nearby, said, "Forgiveness is overrated. Understanding lasts longer." She smiled. "Then I hope for both." Winter came early that year, the kind that freezes breath to glass. The shop closed for the night, the town dimmed to embers, and Evelyn sat by the window, staring at the frost blooming on the panes. "Tell me," she said suddenly, "do you miss it? The uniform, the service, the knowing where you stand?" Thomas looked up from the hearth. "Sometimes. But standing beside you feels enough like purpose." She turned toward him. "And if I asked you to go back, to Briarwood, as its master mechanic, would you?" He frowned. "Would they even have me?" "They will," she said, "because I'll ask." "And because we'll go together, you mean to return?" "Yes. Not to beg entry, to open the doors properly this time." He nodded slowly. "Then we'd best tune the old girl." It's a long drive. Spring brought them back to the manor. The gates hung open, ivy swallowing the stone pillars. The place looked smaller than memory allowed. Evelyn stopped the car beneath the great yew by the chapel. The ground was soft, the air thick with the smell of thawed earth. Lady Whitmore waited on the steps. No pearls, no audience, just a shawl, a cane, and eyes that had finally learned to see. "You came?" she said. "I never truly left," Evelyn answered. "I only went far enough to hear myself think." Lady Whitmore's gaze fell on Thomas. "And the driver?" Evelyn took his hand. "The man who taught me what freedom sounds like." Silence stretched, fragile but not cruel. Then the older woman nodded once. "Your father would have liked him. He despised idle men." They walked through the garden together. The fountain was cracked, the roses gone to thorn. Evelyn touched the stone rim. "I'll have it mended." "The tenants deserve a place that still breathes." Lady Whitmore sighed. "You mean to make it theirs?" "Half the estate, yes. The rest for a school. A workshop for those who never had the right to touch a steering wheel." Her mother studied her. "You were always the one who wanted to drive." Evelyn smiled. "Now I know why the engine wouldn't start. It was waiting for me." That night, after supper, Evelyn stood at the garage door. The Daimler sat gleaming, restored. She ran a hand over its brass bonnet, feeling the pulse of its metal heart. Thomas joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's ready," he said. "So am I." He nodded toward the road. "Where to this time?" "Anywhere worth the journey." She slipped into the driver's seat. He climbed in beside her. The headlights swept across the courtyard, catching her mother's figure in the doorway. One hand raised, not in warning, but farewell. Evelyn turned the key. The engine started at once, smooth and certain. As the car rolled into the night, she looked at Thomas and said, "Funny thing about engines." "What's that?" "They only run when fire meets air, when two opposites trust each other enough to spark." He smiled. "Then here's to opposites." "And to trust," she added. The road curved toward the horizon, a ribbon of silver in the moonlight. The wind caught her hair. The world opened like a promise finally kept. Behind them, Briarwood's windows glowed softly, no longer a prison, but a beacon. Evelyn pressed her foot to the pedal and whispered, almost to herself, "Freedom isn't given. It's driven."